The silence in my own cabin was thick and suffocating. Across the heavy oak table my great-uncle had built with his own 2 hands sat Margaret, the president of the Serenity Woods Homeowners Association, and her slick, smiling lawyer. Through a campaign of legal threats and intimidation, forced this meeting. They were in my home, on my land, to deliver their final ultimatum. "So, it's really very simple, Elias," the lawyer said, his voice dripping with a condescending reasonableness that made my skin crawl. He slid a thick, professionally bound document across the table. It was a formal offer to purchase the 5 acres of meadow behind my cabin for a price that was a fraction of its worth. You can accept this generous offer, and all the unfortunate code violations and fines will simply disappear. Or you can refuse, and we will proceed with the county condemnation hearing. Choice is yours. But I think you'll find this is the only sensible path. Margaret just sat there, beaming. It looked like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. It had me. They were going to steal my land, and they were using the full weight of their wealth and the law to do it. It felt like the end. I looked at their offer. I looked at their smug, confident faces, and then I gave them a slow, quiet smile. I stood up, walked over to the massive old iron safe that was built into the stone of the fireplace. A piece they had probably dismissed as a rustic curiosity. I spun the heavy antique dial, the clicks echoing in the silent room. The heavy door swung open with a deep groan. From inside, I removed another document. An old leather-bound portfolio, cracked and softened with age. I placed it on the table with a heavy, satisfying thud. "That's a very interesting offer," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Now let's talk about my offer. For the land that your house is sitting on." The lawyer's smile faltered. Margaret's face went from a mask of triumph to one of pure, uncomprehending confusion. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment, you have to understand my great-uncle and the legacy he left me. My name is Elias. For the last 10 years, my life has been one of motion. I was a travel photographer, a digital nomad. My home was a backpack, my address a series of temporary Airbnbs. I was always searching for something, a sense of place, of permanence that I could never quite find. And then my great-uncle Arthur passed away. He was a man I barely knew, a reclusive, almost mythical figure in my family. He had been a shrewd businessman who had, decades ago, bought up a vast, beautiful tract of mountain land and then simply disappeared into it. When his lawyer contacted me, I was shocked to learn that he had left me his entire estate. He had no other family. I was the last of the line. The inheritance wasn't money. It was land and a responsibility. I left my life on the road and drove to the mountains, to a place called Serenity Woods, to see what I now owned. The heart of the property was my great-uncle's cabin. It was a simple, beautiful log structure, a masterpiece of rustic craftsmanship. Sitting on a stunning 10-acre plot of meadow and forest, was more real, more solid than anything I had ever known. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was home. My great-uncle's lawyer met me at the cabin. He handed me the keys, and then he handed me a heavy, ancient-looking leather portfolio. "This is the important part," he had said, his voice grave. "Your great-uncle was a very, very smart man. His portfolio contains the founding documents. For the Serenity Woods Trust, you are the new sole trustee. Read these. Understand them. They are your shield and your sword." I was overwhelmed. I was a photographer, not a lawyer. I took the heavy portfolio, placed it in the old iron safe in the cabin, and told myself I'd get to it later. I was more interested in exploring the woods, in learning the rhythms of my new home. I had no idea that the documents in that safe were the keys to the entire kingdom. The kingdom, I soon learned, had a queen. The day after I moved in, a gleaming white SUV pulled up my long gravel driveway. A woman emerged, dressed in expensive athletic wear, her face a mask of perfectly maintained aggressive friendliness. It was Margaret, president of the Serenity Woods HOA. She looked me up and down, a young man in dusty hiking boots and a faded t-shirt tanned. Her eyes were filled with an immediate, dismissive judgment. "Hello," she said, her tone nat, of a landowner speaking to a hired hand. "I'm Margaret, the president of the association." "And you are Elias," I said. "I'm the new owner. My great-uncle, Arthur, passed away." "I see," she said, her eyes already scanning my property, cataloging every perceived flaw. "Well, Elias, you should know that we have very high standards here in Serenity Woods. That cabin has been a vacant eyesore for years. The board will be expecting you to submit a full renovation and landscaping plan for our approval immediately. You can't have it dragging down the property values." She was standing on my land that I was just beginning to realize the scope of, and she was giving me orders. "I'm sorry," I said, confused. "I don't think this property is part of your HOA." She let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, that's adorable. Everyone in Serenity Woods is in the HOA. That's what makes it serene. You'll find our new member welcome packet in your first invoice in your mailbox." She turned and left, leaving me in a state of bewildered anger. The first invoice arrived the next day. A $5,000 new member capital contribution fee. Wrote "not a member" on it and sent it back. And so, the war began. Week later, the first formal violation notice was taped to my door. It was for the dilapidated and non-compliant state of my cabin. It was a historic structure, not a modern mansion. Of course, it wasn't compliant with her sterile beige gray aesthetic. The notice came with a daily fine of $100. My inner monologue was a swirl of disbelief and growing frustration. I was a private person. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to be left in peace to get to know my new home, my new life. But this woman, this tyrant, was determined to make my life a living hell. I did nothing. I just let the fraudulent notices pile up. Then, Margaret escalated. She showed up at my door one afternoon, this time with a smarmy-looking man in a suit. "A real estate developer, Elias," she announced, as if she were bestowing upon me a great gift. "This is Mr. Abernathy. We have a wonderful solution to your problem." She gestured at my beautiful historic cabin as if it were a pile of trash. "The HOA has decided that the best use for this unsightly parcel of land would be a new community wellness center. A pool, tennis courts, a spa, a real asset to the community. Mr. Abernathy, on behalf of the HOA, is prepared to make you a very generous offer to buy you out." The offer was an insult. It was less than the raw land was worth, let alone the historic cabin that sat on it. "No," I said, my voice cold. "The answer is no. This is my home. It is not for sale. And you are trespassing. Please leave." Margaret's face turned to stone. "You will regret that decision," she said, her voice a low hiss. "We have other ways of dealing with uncooperative squatters." The threat was chilling. It was followed by a letter from the HOA's lawyers. It was a formal notice, threatening to petition the county to have my cabin and the surrounding structures condemned as a public nuisance and a fire hazard. It was a legal maneuver designed to force a sale, to use the county's power to do her dirty work. The legal threat felt very real, very terrifying. It felt like the walls were closing in. That was the night I finally opened the safe. That was the night I finally took my great-uncle's portfolio to the heavy oak table, and, with a bottle of whiskey and a deep sense of dread, I began to read. It took me a week of late nights, of deciphering archaic legal language, of cross-referencing old hand-drawn maps with modern satellite imagery. And as I read, as the full scope of my great-uncle's shrewd, brilliant plan came into focus, my dread began to transform. It morphed into a slow, burning, and absolutely glorious rage. The truth was so much bigger, so much more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. My great-uncle hadn't just owned the cabin and its 10 acres. That was just his personal, private homestead. The entire 500-acre Serenity Woods development. The land under every single multi-million-dollar mansion, under every perfectly manicured lawn, under the stupid, pretentious clubhouse, under Margaret's own house, all of it, was on land that was part of a 99-year land lease. lease that had been granted to the original developer by Mike Graytunkel. A lease whose ownership and all the rights that came with it had passed from him to the trust. A trust that I now controlled. I wasn't just their neighbor. I was their landlord. Just as I was absorbing this world-altering revelation, a certified letter arrived. It was from Margaret and the HOA's lawyer. They were done making offers. Were now demanding an on-site pre-condemnation inspection and formal meeting at my cabin to present me with their final, non-negotiable offer before they proceeded with the county hearing. I replied and told them I would be happy to host the meeting, and that brings us back to that moment. Margaret and her lawyer, sitting in my cabin, arrogant, condescending, and completely oblivious. They had just laid out their threat, their final insulting offer. They felt they had me completely cornered. I let them finish their entire pompous speech, let the silence hang in the air for a long, satisfying moment. And then I walked to the safe, pulled out the heavy, leather-bound master land lease agreement, and slid it across the table. "That's a very interesting offer," I said. My voice calm, the rage now a cold, hard, and beautiful instrument. "But I believe you're in the wrong seat to be making it. See, you're the tenant, I'm the landlord." I watched their faces as they read the first page. It's the one that clearly outlined the lesser-lessee relationship between the Vance family trust, Elias Vance, trustee, and the Serenity Woods developer and its successor, the HOA. I watched the color drain from their faces. I watched as the smug confidence in their eyes was replaced by a dawning, panicked horror. The lawyer, to his credit, understood the catastrophic implications immediately. His face went as white as a sheet. Margaret, however, was still sputtering. This is impossible. It's a trick. We own our homes."
"I know, Margaret,"
I said, leaning forward. "You own your houses, the buildings, a collection of wood, glass, and drywall. You do not own the ground they are sitting on." "I do, and you," I said, my voice dropping, "are a very, very bad tenant." I then flipped to the section on lessee. Covenants. It says right here in the contract that gives you the privilege of living here, that the lessee is responsible for maintaining the property in a way that does not harass, intimidate, or infringe upon the legal rights of the lessor, or the lessor's personal property. I believe a year-long campaign of illegal harassment, fraudulent fines, and a bad faith attempt to seize my private deeded land via a sham condemnation hearing constitutes a rather significant material breach of this lease, don't you? Lawyer looked like he was going to be physically ill. He was speechless. I then delivered the final, beautiful, killing blow. "So, I am officially rejecting your insulting offer to buy my meadow. Instead, I am exercising my rights as the lessor. As per Section 12 of this agreement, which is the penalty clause for a material breach, I let that hang in the air. I am giving you and the entire Homeowners Association two options. Option 1. The HOA can be immediately and voluntarily dissolved, and every single one of you can start paying your monthly land lease payments, which will be calculated at current market rates directly to me. Option 2. I can exercise my right to terminate the master lease for the entire development due to this breach, in which case, you all have 180 days to move your houses, your cars, and your perfectly manicured lawns off of my land." The lawyer immediately understood the catastrophic position they were in. Margaret was left sputtering, her entire world, her entire sense of power and identity, shattered in the space of 5 minutes. The news ripped through the community like a wildfire. The HOA was thrown into a state of absolute chaos. The residents, who had been completely unaware of their status as tenants, were terrified and furious. Margaret was, of course, immediately and viciously removed from her presidency in a panicked, screaming emergency meeting. She was a pariah, the woman whose arrogance had put all of their homes at my mercy. A new, humbled, and deeply terrified HOA board, accompanied by a team of very expensive lawyers, came to me to negotiate. They chose option 1. The HOA was dissolved. I am now the direct landlord for every single homeowner in the development. I had my lawyers draft new, simple, and fair land lease agreements. My very first act as their new landlord was to send a formal notarized notice to Margaret, informing her that due to her well-documented history of conduct unbecoming of a tenant, her personal lease would not be renewed at the end of the year. This whole brutal war taught me a profound lesson. People who are obsessed with power and control often fail to understand the true source of it. Margaret thought power came from a title she had been elected to, from a binder full of rules she had written. She never bothered to look at the century-old document that defined the very ground she stood on. And in the end, that history, the quiet, patient power of the land itself, rose up and evicted her from her own fantasy. Margaret and her husband are gone, and the neighborhood is finally, truly, serene. But I've just been informed by my lawyer that a massive publicly traded development corporation has bought up the land on the other side of my cabin. They've just submitted a proposal to the county to have my great-uncle's original trust. Documents declared legally ambiguous and a monopoly on local housing.